Detective Marcus Sullivan walked into the police station like he owned the place. His shiny black shoes clicked on the floor as other officers nodded at him with respect. At 42 years old, Marcus had spent 15 years wearing the badge. Everyone knew his name. Everyone knew his record. He caught more criminals than anyone else in the department. But what they did not know was the truth about Marcus Sullivan. The morning sun shined through the windows of his office as Marcus sat behind his desk. His uniform was perfect. His badge gleamed. On his desk sat pictures of his wife Jennifer and their 12-year-old daughter Ashley. Next to the photos was a thick stack of case files. Marcus smiled as he looked at the numbers. Another month, another high arrest rate. His phone buzzed. A text message from someone named Rico. Package delivered. Your cut is ready. Marcus deleted the message quickly. He looked around to make sure no one was watching. Then he smiled again. Marcus had learned long ago that being a good cop did not pay well. His salary was okay, but it was not enough for the life he wanted. It was not enough for the big house in the nice neighborhood. It was not enough for Ashley's private school. It was not enough for Jennifer's expensive clothes and jewelry, so Marcus had found other ways to make money. It started small 5 years ago. A drug dealer named Tony offered him $500 to look the other way during a bust. Marcus thought about it for 3 days. He thought about Ashley's school fees. He thought about the mortgage payment. He thought about Jennifer always asking for more money. Finally, he took the deal. Tony walked free that day. Marcus went home with $500 in cash. It felt wrong at first. Marcus could not sleep that night. But when he saw Ashley's happy face at her expensive school the next week, the guilt went away. After Tony, there were others. Drug dealers paid him to warn them about raids. Thieves paid him to lose evidence. Even some businessmen paid him to make problems disappear. The money kept coming. Marcus got good at hiding it. He learned to plant evidence when he needed to. He learned to write false reports. He learned to make witnesses say what he wanted them to say. Most importantly, he learned that no one questioned a decorated detective with 15 years of experience. Marcus's arrest rate stayed high because he always found someone to blame for every crime. It did not matter if they were guilty or not. What mattered was closing cases and keeping his reputation clean. The big house came first. A beautiful 4-bedroom home in Oakwood Heights, the best neighborhood in the city. Jennifer loved showing it off to her friends. The mortgage was $3,000 a month, but the dirty money made it easy to pay. Then came the cars. Marcus drove a new black SUV that cost more than most people made in a year. Jennifer had a red convertible that she parked in their driveway like a trophy. Ashley's private school cost $15,000 a year. But she was getting the best education money could buy. She had piano lessons, dance classes, and tutoring. Jennifer made sure Ashley had everything the other rich kids had. Marcus felt proud when he watched Ashley play with her friends at school events. These were the children of doctors, lawyers, and business owners. His daughter fit right in. No one would ever know that her father's money came from criminals and corruption. The lies became easier over time. Marcus could look his captain in the eye and lie without blinking. He could shake hands with honest cops and pretend to be one of them. He could come home to Jennifer and Ashley and act like a hero who served and protected the community. But Marcus was always careful. He never took money from violent criminals. He never helped anyone who hurt children. He told himself he had rules. He told himself he was not really a bad person. He was just a man trying to provide for his family. On the other side of the city, David Chen was getting ready for another long day. At 28 years old, David worked 2 jobs to support his small family. During the day, he taught basic math and English at Metro Community College. At night and on weekends, he worked as a mechanic at his friend's auto repair shop. David's apartment was small and old, but it was clean and filled with love. He shared it with his wife, Maria, who was 6 months pregnant with their first child. They had been married for 3 years and saved every penny they could for the baby. Maria worked as a nurse at a free clinic in the poor part of town. She helped people who could not afford to go to expensive hospitals. The work was hard and the pay was low, but Maria loved helping others. She and David both believed in doing the right thing, even when it was difficult. Their apartment had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a small kitchen. The furniture was old and came from thrift stores. They did not have expensive things, but they had each other. That was enough for them. David's students at the community college loved him. He was patient and kind. He stayed after class to help students who struggled. Many of his students were adults who had never finished high school. David helped them learn the skills they needed to get better jobs and build better lives. At the auto shop, David was known for being honest. He never charged customers for work they did not need. He always explained what was wrong with their cars in simple words they could understand. The shop owner, Miguel, trusted David completely. Every night, David came home tired but happy. He would rub Maria's growing belly and talk to their unborn baby. They had already picked out names. If it was a boy, they would call him Daniel. If it was a girl, they would call her Emma. David and Maria had simple dreams. They wanted to buy a small house with a yard where their child could play. They wanted to save money for college. They wanted to give their family a good life through hard work and honesty. They had no idea that their peaceful world was about to be destroyed by Marcus Sullivan's greed and corruption. The two men lived in the same city but in completely different worlds. Marcus lived in luxury built on lies and stolen money. David lived simply but with truth and honor. Soon their paths would cross in the most terrible way possible. Neither man knew that a jewelry store robbery was about to change everything. Neither man knew that Marcus's need to maintain his reputation would destroy David's innocent life. Neither man knew that 15 years of corruption was about to crash down on both of their families. The stage was set for a collision between good and evil, between truth and lies, between an honest man and a corrupt cop who had forgotten what justice really meant. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. on a cold Tuesday night. Goldberg's fine jewelry had been robbed. Two masked men with guns had taken over $200,000 worth of diamonds, watches, and gold. The store owner, Mr. Goldberg, was in the hospital with a broken arm and a concussion. Marcus Sullivan got the call at home. He was sitting in his expensive leather chair, watching television and drinking whiskey. Jennifer was already asleep upstairs. Ashley was at a sleepover with friends from her private school. "Detective Sullivan, we need you down here right away," said Officer Martinez over the phone. "This is a big one. Captain wants his best man on it." Marcus smiled. His best man. If only they knew the truth. By the time Marcus arrived at the jewelry store, the area was surrounded by police cars and yellow tape. The flashing lights painted the dark street in red and blue. Neighbors stood on their porches trying to see what had happened. Captain Rodriguez was waiting for Marcus outside the store. Captain Rodriguez was a good man who believed in justice. He trusted Marcus completely. He had no idea that his best detective was dirty. "What do we have, Captain?" Marcus asked, pulling out his notebook. "Two suspects, both armed, both wearing masks," Captain Rodriguez said. They knew exactly what they wanted. Went straight for the most expensive pieces. This was not random. These guys had inside information. Marcus nodded and walked into the store. Glass was everywhere. Display cases were smashed open. The cash register was broken. Bloodstains on the floor showed where Mr. Goldberg had been beaten. "Any witnesses?" Marcus asked. "The store owner, but he's unconscious at the hospital. There's a coffee shop across the street." The night manager saw two men running from the store, but it was too dark to see their faces. Marcus spent 2 hours at the crime scene. He took pictures. He collected evidence. He interviewed the coffee shop manager, a young woman named Lisa, who had been closing up when she heard the glass breaking. "I saw them run toward Pine Street," Lisa told Marcus. "One was tall, one was short. They had dark clothes and baseball caps. That's all I could see." Pine Street. Marcus knew Pine Street well. It was in David Chen's neighborhood. By 3 a.m., Marcus was back at the police station writing his report. The case was big news. Channel 7 had already run a story about it. The newspaper would have it on the front page tomorrow. Everyone in the city would be watching to see if the police could catch the robbers. Captain Rodriguez stopped by Marcus's desk. "The mayor called. He wants this solved fast. Bad for business when jewelry stores get robbed. Makes the whole downtown look unsafe." "I understand, Captain. I'll find these guys." "I know you will, Sullivan. You always do." After Captain Rodriguez left, Marcus sat alone at his desk. He had a problem. His usual network of criminals had gone quiet. Tony, his main contact in the drug world, had been arrested last week by federal agents. Rico was hiding from the police after a warehouse raid. His other sources were either in jail or too scared to talk. For the first time in years, Marcus had no easy leads. No one to pay for information. No criminals willing to give up other criminals in exchange for light sentences. But the pressure was on. The mayor wanted results. Captain Rodriguez wanted results. The newspaper and television reporters would be asking questions every day until someone was arrested. Marcus had built his reputation on solving cases quickly. If he failed now, people might start asking questions about his methods. They might look too closely at his other cases. They might discover his secrets. He needed to arrest someone. Anyone. Marcus drove around the city for the next 3 days looking for possibilities. He watched drug corners hoping to see someone he could pressure into confessing. He visited bars where criminals hung out, hoping to overhear useful information. Nothing. On Friday night, Marcus was driving through the Pine Street neighborhood when he saw him, a young Asian man walking alone on the sidewalk. The man was wearing a dark jacket and jeans. He was about the right height for one of the robbers Lisa had described. Marcus had never seen this man before, but something about him looked familiar. Then he remembered. A few months ago, he had responded to a noise complaint in this neighborhood. This man had answered the door. He had been polite and respectful. He had apologized for the loud music and promised to turn it down. Marcus remembered thinking, the man seemed like a good person, honest, hardworking, the kind of person who would never hurt anyone. Perfect. Marcus parked his car and watched the man walk home. He followed at a distance and saw the man enter a small apartment building. Marcus wrote down the address. Then he went back to the station to do research. The man's name was David Chen, 28 years old. No criminal record. He worked at Metro Community College as a teacher. He also worked part-time at Miguel's Auto Repair. He was married to Maria Chen, a nurse. No children yet, but Marcus could see from the database that Maria was pregnant. David Chen was exactly what Marcus needed. An innocent man who could not fight back. Over the weekend, Marcus began building his case against David. He started with the evidence from the crime scene. The robbers had left fingerprints on the broken glass, but the prints were smudged and unclear. Marcus took the fingerprint cards to the lab on Saturday when no one else was there. Marcus had learned to lift fingerprints years ago. It was part of his training as a detective. But he had also learned to plant them. He visited Miguel's Auto Repair late at night and found tools that David had been using. A wrench, a screwdriver, and a pair of pliers all had David's fingerprints on them. Marcus carefully transferred David's prints to evidence bags. Then he labeled them as fingerprints found at the jewelry store. The lab technician who would process them on Monday would never know the difference. Next, Marcus needed witnesses. He drove to the coffee shop across from the jewelry store and found Lisa, the night manager. "I've been thinking about what you saw that night," Marcus told her. "Are you sure about the height of the suspects?" "Well, it was dark and I was scared," Lisa said. "Maybe I was wrong about one being short. They might have both been medium height." "Medium height? Like 5'8" or 5'9"? "Yes, that sounds right." David Chen was 5'8". Marcus also visited 2 of his old informants who owed him favors. These were small-time criminals who had avoided jail time because Marcus had helped them in the past. Now it was time for them to return the favor. "I need you to identify someone in a lineup," Marcus told the first informant. "A drug dealer named Carlos." "I don't know anything about any jewelry store robbery," Carlos said. "You don't need to know anything. You just need to pick out the guy I point to. In exchange, that drug charge from last month disappears." Carlos nodded. He had no choice. The second informant was a thief named Kevin who had been caught breaking into cars. Marcus had let him go in exchange for information that never came. Now Kevin would finally be useful. "One day in court, one simple identification, and your file gets lost," Marcus promised. Kevin agreed. By Sunday night, Marcus had everything he needed: fake fingerprint evidence, witness statements that could be interpreted to fit David's description, 2 paid informants ready to identify David in a lineup. On Monday morning, Marcus prepared the arrest warrant. He wrote that David Chen matched the physical description given by witnesses. He wrote that David's fingerprints had been found at the crime scene. He wrote that reliable informants had identified David as someone who had been asking questions about jewelry store security. All lies. Judge Harrison signed the warrant without question. Judge Harrison trusted Marcus Sullivan. Marcus had brought him dozens of cases over the years. Every arrest had led to a conviction. Judge Harrison had no reason to doubt Marcus now. That evening, Marcus drove to David's apartment building. He brought 4 other officers with him. He wanted the arrest to look official and important. David was walking home from his evening job at the auto repair shop. He was tired but happy. Maria had felt the baby kick for the first time that day. They had spent the afternoon talking about baby names and looking at cribs online. David saw the police cars outside his building and wondered what had happened. Maybe there had been a break-in or a domestic violence call. He hoped no one was hurt. He never imagined that the police were there for him. "David Chen?" Marcus called out as David approached the building. "Yes, that's me. Is everything okay?" Marcus smiled his professional smile. "David Chen, you're under arrest for armed robbery and aggravated assault." David's world stopped. The words did not make sense. Armed robbery? Aggravated assault? There had to be some mistake. "I think you have the wrong person," David said calmly. "I'm a teacher. I've never robbed anyone." "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," Marcus ordered. The handcuffs were cold against David's wrists. The other officers searched him and found only his wallet, his keys, and his cell phone. No weapons. No jewelry. No evidence of any crime. "What is this about?" David asked. "What robbery? When did this happen?" "Goldberg's fine jewelry Tuesday night," Marcus said. "Your fingerprints were all over the scene." "That's impossible. I was teaching a class Tuesday night. I have 20 students who can tell you where I was." "Save it for the lawyer," Marcus said. As they put David in the back of the police car, Maria came running out of the apartment building. She had been waiting for David to come home for dinner. David sat in the cold jail cell, staring at the gray concrete walls. 3 days had passed since his arrest, and he still could not believe this was happening. The orange jumpsuit felt strange against his skin. The metal bars reminded him every second that his freedom was gone. His cellmate was a man named Jerome who had been arrested for selling drugs. Jerome was nice enough, but David felt scared and alone. He had never been in jail before. He had never even gotten a speeding ticket. "First time?" Jerome asked, seeing the fear in David's eyes. "Yeah," David whispered, "and it's all a mistake." "I didn't do anything wrong." Jerome laughed, but not in a mean way. "Man, everyone in here says they didn't do it. But you actually look like you're telling the truth." David's bail was set at $50,000. That meant he needed $5,000 to get out while he waited for trial. David and Maria had been saving money for the baby, but they only had $3,000 in their bank account. Maria tried everything. She asked her parents for help, but they were old and living on Social Security. She asked David's brother, but he was a construction worker with his own family to support. She even tried to get a loan from the bank, but they said no because she did not have enough income. David had to stay in jail. The worst part was not knowing why this was happening. The public defender assigned to David's case was a tired woman named Rebecca Martinez. She had too many cases and not enough time. When she finally visited David, she looked exhausted. "Mr. Chen, I've looked at the evidence against you," she said, sitting across from him in the small visiting room. "I have to be honest. It doesn't look good." "But I didn't do it," David said. "I was teaching a class when the robbery happened. I have witnesses." "I know you say that, but the police have your fingerprints at the crime scene. They have witnesses who identified you, and they have informants who say you were asking about jewelry store security." David felt like the room was spinning. "That's all impossible. I've never been to that jewelry store. I don't know anything about robbery. How can my fingerprints be there?" Rebecca shrugged. "Sometimes evidence gets mixed up. Sometimes mistakes happen. But proving that in court is very difficult. Detective Sullivan has a great reputation. Juries trust him, so what do? We try to build a defense around your alibi. You say you were teaching Tuesday night. I'll contact the college and get a list of your students." David felt a little hope. "Yes, call Professor Williams. He's the department head. He can tell you about my schedule. And call my students. They'll remember I was there." But when Rebecca called Metro Community College, she ran into problems. Professor Williams had been fired the week before for budget cuts. The new department head, Dr. Foster, was too busy to talk about David's case. "Look, I'm sure Mr. Chen is a good teacher," Dr. Foster told Rebecca over the phone, "but I can't have someone charged with armed robbery working here. I had to let him go." David lost his teaching job while sitting in jail. Rebecca tried to contact David's students, but most of them did not have phones or had moved. The few she could reach were afraid to get involved. They were poor people who did not trust the police or the courts. They did not want to testify in a criminal trial. Only 3 students agreed to be witnesses. Mrs. Johnson, an elderly woman learning to read. Carlos Mendez, a young father studying for his GED. And Linda Washington, a single mother trying to become a nurse. 3 witnesses is not enough, Rebecca told David during another visit. The prosecutor will say they're just trying to help you because they like you as a teacher. We need more. David felt his hope slipping away. What about my job at the auto shop? Miguel can tell you I was there working late Tuesday night, Rebecca shook her head. The robbery happened at 11:47 p.m. Your boss says you left work at 10:30. That gives you over an hour to get to the jewelry store. But I went straight home. Maria can tell you that. Wives can't testify for their husbands in cases like this. The jury won't believe her anyway. They'll think she's lying to protect you. As the weeks passed, Maria's life became a nightmare. She was 7 months pregnant and struggling to pay rent without David's income. The nurse job at the free clinic did not pay much. She had to move in with her elderly parents, sleeping on their couch. The stress was bad for the baby. Maria's blood pressure went up. She had trouble sleeping. She cried every night, holding her growing belly and wondering how she would raise a child alone if David went to prison. The neighborhood where Maria's parents lived was rough. Gang members sold drugs on the corner. Police sirens wailed through the night. Maria was afraid to walk to the bus stop after dark. David's reputation was destroyed. The local newspaper ran a story about his arrest with the headline, "Local Teacher Charged in Jewelry Store Robbery." The article made him sound guilty. It mentioned his fingerprints and the witness identification. It did not mention that he had no criminal record or that he was known as a good, honest person. People in the community read the story and shook their heads. How could a teacher do such a thing? Parents were glad their children would not be in his classroom anymore. At Miguel's auto repair, the customers started asking questions. Isn't that the guy who got arrested? The one who worked here? Miguel had to put up a sign saying that David no longer worked there. Miguel believed David was innocent, but he could not afford to lose business. The auto shop was struggling already. He felt terrible, but he had to distance himself from David's case. Meanwhile, Marcus Sullivan was being praised for solving the jewelry store robbery so quickly. Captain Rodriguez recommended him for a commendation. The mayor mentioned him in a speech about effective policing. Detective Sullivan shows what good police work looks like, the mayor said at a press conference. Fast arrests, solid evidence, justice for the victims. Marcus felt proud as he watched the news coverage. His reputation was stronger than ever. No one suspected that he had framed an innocent man. At home, Jennifer Sullivan was planning a vacation to Europe. We can afford it now, she told Marcus. Your promotion is coming soon. The captain loves you. Ashley Sullivan was excited about summer camp. It cost $3,000, but Marcus said yes without hesitation. His dirty money made everything possible. Marcus sometimes thought about David Chen sitting in jail, but he pushed those thoughts away. David was a necessary sacrifice. Marcus had to protect his lifestyle and his family's future. One innocent man's suffering was worth it. The trial date was set for 6 months after David's arrest. Rebecca Martinez tried to prepare a defense, but everything was working against them. She had no money for expert witnesses who could challenge the fingerprint evidence. She had no private investigators to dig deeper into the case. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Sarah Kim, was confident about winning. She had Detective Sullivan's evidence and testimony. She had witnesses and informants. She had a defendant who looked guilty to a jury that wanted to see criminals punished. This is a slam dunk, Sarah Kim told her staff. Armed robbery, clear evidence, reliable detective. The defendant will probably take a plea deal. But David refused to take a plea deal. Even when Rebecca told him he could get only 5 years instead of 15, David said no. I won't say I'm guilty when I'm innocent, David told her. I won't lie just to get a lighter sentence. David, you could be out in 3 years with good behavior. You could see your child grow up. My child deserves a father who stands up for the truth, David said firmly. Maria supported David's decision, even though it scared her. She visited him every week, her belly growing bigger each time. They talked about the baby and tried to stay hopeful. When this is over, we'll have our family back, Maria whispered through the glass during one visit. When this is over, everyone will know I'm innocent, David replied. But as the trial date got closer, both of them were losing hope. The evidence against David looked strong. Rebecca Martinez was overwhelmed and underprepared. The system seemed designed to convict him, whether he was guilty or not. David's life had been completely destroyed by Marcus Sullivan's lies. His job was gone. His reputation was ruined. His pregnant wife was living in poverty. His future looked like 15 years in prison. Marcus Sullivan had successfully framed an innocent man, and no one suspected the truth. The corrupt detective's plan was working perfectly. David Chen, who had never hurt anyone in his life, was about to face trial for a crime he did not commit. The American justice system, which was supposed to protect the innocent, was about to fail him completely. As David lay on his narrow jail cot at night, listening to the sounds of other prisoners, he prayed that somehow the truth would come out. He prayed that his child would be born into a world where justice still existed. But with each passing day, those prayers seemed less likely to be answered. The trial would begin in 2 months, and David's fight for his freedom and his life was just beginning. The courthouse was packed on the first day of David's trial. Reporters sat in the front rows ready to write about another criminal being brought to justice. Mr. Goldberg, the jewelry store owner, sat with his family, still wearing a cast on his broken arm. David walked into the courtroom wearing a cheap suit that Rebecca Martinez had bought for him. He looked thin and tired after 6 months in jail. His hands were cuffed until he sat down at the defense table. Maria was in the back row, 8 months pregnant and trying not to cry. Her parents sat beside her, holding her hands for support. They had spent their last bit of savings on bus tickets to attend the trial. Judge Patricia Collins called the court to order. She was known as a tough judge who did not tolerate crime. She had sent hundreds of criminals to prison during her 20 years on the bench. The case of State versus David Chen, charged with armed robbery and aggravated assault, Judge Collins announced. Assistant District Attorney Sarah Kim stood up to give her opening statement. She was confident and well-prepared. Her expensive suit and perfect hair made her look like she could convince anyone of anything. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Sarah Kim began, this case is about a man who thought he could get rich quick by robbing innocent people. David Chen planned and executed an armed robbery that left an elderly store owner beaten and hospitalized. She pointed at David as she spoke. The evidence will show that the defendant's fingerprints were found at the crime scene. Witnesses will testify that they saw him fleeing the area. Reliable informants will tell you that the defendant was asking questions about jewelry store security weeks before the robbery. Sarah Kim walked closer to the jury box. Mr. Goldberg is 73 years old. He has run his jewelry store for 40 years without any trouble. He trusted his community and kept his doors open late to serve working people who could only shop after hours. The defendant repaid that trust with violence and theft. The prosecutor held up photos of the destroyed jewelry store. Glass everywhere, blood on the floor, broken display cases. This is what the defendant did to an honest businessman who was just trying to make a living. Sarah Kim sat down, satisfied that she had painted David as a dangerous criminal. Rebecca Martinez stood up for the defense opening statement. She looked nervous and unprepared compared to the prosecutor. Her notes were scattered and her voice was shaky. Ladies and gentlemen, my client David Chen is innocent, Rebecca began. He is a teacher and a mechanic who has never committed a crime in his life. The police arrested the wrong man because they were under pressure to solve this case quickly. Rebecca tried to explain about David's alibi, but she stumbled over her words. Mr. Chen was teaching a class when this robbery occurred. He has witnesses who will testify that he was at Metro Community College, not at any jewelry store. But even Rebecca did not sound completely convinced. The evidence against David looked strong on paper. She was hoping for reasonable doubt, not proving innocence. The prosecution's case began with Detective Marcus Sullivan taking the witness stand. Marcus wore his dress uniform with all his medals and commendations. He looked like the perfect police officer. Detective Sullivan, how long have you been with the police department? Sarah Kim asked. 15 years, ma'am. I've investigated over 300 felony cases. And what is your conviction rate? 97%. Almost everyone I arrest gets convicted. The jury looked impressed. Marcus smiled confidently. Sarah Kim walked Marcus through the investigation. He testified about finding David's fingerprints at the crime scene. He described how witnesses identified David as matching the description of one of the robbers. The evidence clearly pointed to Mr. Chen. Marcus said, looking directly at the jury. His prints were on the broken glass. Multiple witnesses placed him in the area. Informants confirmed he had been asking about jewelry store security. Rebecca Martinez cross-examined Marcus, but she was no match for his experience. Marcus had testified in court hundreds of times. He knew how to handle defense lawyers. "Detective Sullivan, did you consider that the fingerprints might have been planted?" Rebecca asked. Marcus looked shocked. "Are you suggesting that I planted evidence?" "That's a very serious accusation, counselor. I'm just asking if you considered other possibilities. The fingerprints were processed by our lab using standard procedures. There's no evidence they were planted or tampered with." Rebecca asked about David's alibi, but Marcus was ready. "Mr. Chen claims he was teaching, but the robbery occurred at 11:47 p.m. His class ended at 10:00 p.m. That gave him plenty of time to get to the jewelry store. But witnesses say he was still at the college after 10 p.m. 3 witnesses, all students who liked him as a teacher. Not very reliable." The jury was clearly believing Marcus over Rebecca. His uniform, his experience, and his confidence made him seem trustworthy. Next came the witnesses. Lisa, the coffee shop manager, testified that she saw 2 men running from the jewelry store. Under pressure from Sarah Kim's questions, she agreed that one of the men could have been David's height and build. "It was dark and I was scared," Lisa admitted. "But the man I saw could have been the defendant." The 2 informants, Carlos and Kevin, testified that David had asked them about jewelry store security. Both men looked nervous and kept glancing at Marcus Sullivan. Rebecca tried to show that the informants were lying, but she could not prove it. Carlos and Kevin stuck to their stories, afraid of what would happen if they told the truth. "Mr. Chen approached me outside a bar," Carlos testified. "He asked me if I knew anything about alarm systems in jewelry stores. He said he was just curious, but it seemed suspicious." When Rebecca asked Carlos about his own criminal record, Sarah Kim objected. "The witnesses' past crimes are not relevant to this case," the prosecutor argued. Judge Collins agreed. Sustained. The jury will disregard. The fingerprint evidence was presented by a lab technician named Robert Hayes. He had processed hundreds of fingerprint samples and seemed very sure of himself. "The prints found on the glass at the jewelry store match the defendant's prints exactly," Hayes testified. "There's no doubt they came from David Chen." Rebecca asked if the prints could have been planted or transferred, but Hayes said it was impossible. "Fingerprints don't lie," he told the jury. "These prints prove Mr. Chen was at that crime scene." Rebecca had no expert witnesses to challenge the fingerprint evidence. She could not afford to hire her own lab technician. The jury heard only one side of the story. When it was time for the defense case, Rebecca called David's 3 student witnesses. Mrs. Johnson, Carlos Mendez, and Linda Washington all testified that David was at the college until at least 11 p.m. on the night of the robbery. "Professor Chen was helping me with my reading," Mrs. Johnson said. "He stayed late to make sure I understood the lesson. He's a good man who cares about his students." But Sarah Kim attacked their credibility during cross-examination. "Mrs. Johnson, you like Mr. Chen as a teacher, don't you?" "Yes, he's very nice." "You wouldn't want to see him go to prison?" "No, of course not." "So you might be willing to lie to help him?" "I'm not lying." But the damage was done. The jury saw the witnesses as biased friends trying to help David escape justice. Rebecca called Miguel from the auto shop to testify about David's character. "David is the most honest person I know," Miguel said. "He would never steal anything. He wouldn't hurt anyone." But Sarah Kim pointed out that David had left work at 10:30 p.m., giving him time to commit the robbery. Finally, David testified in his own defense. He told the jury about his life as a teacher and mechanic. He explained that he had never been to Goldberg's jewelry store. He swore that he was innocent. "I was at the college helping my students," David said. "I would never rob anyone. I've worked hard my whole life for everything I have." But Sarah Kim's cross-examination was brutal. "Mr. Chen, you need money for your new baby, don't you?" "Yes, but I would never steal it." "Your wife lost her job because of stress from your arrest. You're losing your apartment. You're desperate for money. That doesn't mean I would commit a crime. You teach at a community college and work as a mechanic. That's not enough money to support a family, is it? We manage okay. But a jewelry store robbery could solve all your money problems, couldn't it?" "I would never do that." David looked desperate and angry on the witness stand. The jury saw his emotion as guilt, not innocence. Rebecca's closing argument was weak and disorganized. She asked the jury to consider reasonable doubt, but she could not explain away the fingerprint evidence or the witness testimony. Sarah Kim's closing argument was powerful and convincing. "The evidence is clear," she told the jury. "David Chen robbed Goldberg's jewelry store. His fingerprints prove he was there. Witnesses saw him fleeing the scene. He had motive, opportunity, and means." She pointed at David again. "Don't let this criminal escape justice because his friends are willing to lie for him. Mr. Goldberg deserves justice. Our community deserves protection from people like the defendant." The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood up to read the verdict. "On the charge of armed robbery, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of aggravated assault, we find the defendant guilty." David's legs gave out. He collapsed into his chair as the words hit him like physical blows. 3 years had passed since David Chen entered Riverside State Prison. The concrete walls and steel bars had become his world. He worked in the prison laundry for 23 cents an hour and spent his evenings in the library reading law books and writing letters. David had changed during his time in prison. The soft-spoken teacher had become harder, more careful. He had learned to watch his back and choose his friends wisely. Prison was a dangerous place, but David had found a few good men who believed in his innocence. His cellmate was an older man named Frank Williams, who had been wrongfully convicted of murder 15 years earlier. Frank had taught David how to survive in prison and how to research legal cases. "The system failed you just like it failed me," Frank told David one evening as they sat in their cell. "But sometimes the truth comes out. You just gotta keep fighting and never give up hope." David wrote letters every week to lawyers, journalists, and innocence organizations. Most never wrote back. Those who did said they could not help without new evidence. Maria visited when she could afford the 4-hour bus ride. Their daughter Emma was now 3 years old, a bright little girl who barely knew her father. Emma called the visits going to see Daddy at his work because Maria did not know how to explain prison to a child. "Daddy, when are you coming home?" Emma asked during one visit, pressing her small hand against the glass that separated them. "Soon, baby girl," David lied, his heart breaking. "Daddy's working very hard to come home soon." Maria looked tired and older than her 31 years. She worked 2 jobs now, cleaning office buildings at night and working at a grocery store during the day. They lived in a tiny apartment in the poorest part of the city. "I got a letter from the appeals court," Maria told David during one visit. "They denied our appeal. Rebecca says there's nothing more she can do." David nodded, trying to stay strong for his family. But inside, he felt his hope dying a little more each day. Meanwhile, Marcus Sullivan was living his best life. He had been promoted to detective sergeant and made more money than ever. His house was now worth over $500,000. Ashley was 16 and drove a new car that Marcus had bought her for her birthday. Marcus had added 2 more rooms to his house and installed a swimming pool in the backyard. Jennifer had quit her part-time job and spent her days shopping and getting her nails done. "You've worked so hard for this family," Jennifer told Marcus one evening as they sat by their pool. "You deserve everything we have." Marcus smiled and sipped his expensive whiskey. He deserved it all. He had taken risks and made sacrifices to provide for his family. David Chen was just the cost of success. But Marcus's world was about to start falling apart piece by piece. It began with a phone call on a Tuesday morning. Agent Lisa Chen from the Federal Bureau of Investigation wanted to speak with Captain Rodriguez about Detective Sullivan's cases. "What's this about?" Captain Rodriguez asked when Agent Chen and her partner Agent Williams arrived at the police station. "We're investigating police corruption in several departments across the state," Agent Chen explained. "Detective Sullivan's name has come up in connection with a federal drug investigation." Captain Rodriguez felt his stomach drop. Marcus Sullivan was his best detective. There had to be some mistake. "I can assure you that Detective Sullivan is one of our most honest officers," Captain Rodriguez said. "His conviction rate is the highest in the department." "That's actually part of what concerns us," Agent Williams said. "We'd like to review some of his cases, starting with his arrests related to drug dealer Antonio Reyes." Tony Reyes had been arrested by federal agents 6 months earlier with 50 pounds of cocaine in his car. Facing life in prison, Tony had decided to cooperate with the FBI. He told them about the police officers he had been paying for protection. Marcus Sullivan was at the top of his list. Sullivan took money from me for 5 years, Tony told the federal agents. I paid him $10,000 a month to warn me about raids and to lose evidence when my guys got arrested. The FBI investigation moved slowly and carefully. They reviewed Marcus's arrest records and found strange patterns. Many of his drug arrests were made just after Tony Reyes had warned him about rival dealers. Evidence often disappeared from cases involving Tony's associates. Agent Chen also noticed something else interesting. Marcus's conviction rate was unusually high, 97%. Most good detectives had conviction rates around 70 to 80%. When a detective's conviction rate is this high, it usually means one of two things, Agent Chen told her partner. Either he's the best cop in the world, or he's planting evidence to make sure everyone gets convicted. The agents began looking at Marcus's cases more carefully. They found several cases where the evidence seemed too perfect. Fingerprints that appeared on items that should not have them. Witnesses who gave nearly identical statements in different cases. Informants who only seemed to provide information to Marcus. One case that caught their attention was the David Chen jewelry store robbery. Agent Chen read the file and found several things that bothered her. David Chen had no criminal record and seemed like an unlikely armed robber. His fingerprints were found at the scene, but only on broken glass, nowhere else in the store. The witnesses gave vague descriptions that could fit almost anyone. The informants who testified against him had criminal records and owed favors to Detective Sullivan. This case smells wrong, Agent Chen told Agent Williams. Everything is too neat, too perfect. While the FBI investigation continued in secret, another person was starting to notice problems with David Chen's case. Sarah Rodriguez was an investigative journalist for the Metro City Herald. She had won awards for exposing corruption and fighting for the underdog. Sarah received hundreds of letters from prisoners claiming they were innocent, but most were obviously guilty men trying to escape punishment. David Chen's letter was different. Dear Ms. Rodriguez, the letter began, My name is David Chen, and I am serving 12 years in prison for a crime I did not commit. I am writing to you because I believe you care about justice and truth. The letter was well written and detailed. David explained his case clearly and provided specific facts that could be checked. He did not sound like a criminal trying to escape responsibility. He sounded like an innocent man desperate for help. Sarah almost threw the letter away. She had investigated wrongful conviction cases before, and they were usually dead ends. But something about David's letter made her keep reading. I was a teacher at Metro Community College when Detective Marcus Sullivan arrested me, David wrote. I had never been in trouble with the law. I was teaching a class when the robbery occurred, but somehow my fingerprints were found at the crime scene. I believe Detective Sullivan planted evidence to frame me. The accusation against Detective Sullivan caught Sarah's attention. She knew Marcus's reputation as a super cop who always got his man, but Sarah had learned to be suspicious of police officers who seemed too good to be true. Sarah decided to take a closer look at David's case. She started by visiting Maria, Chen, and little Emma. They lived in a rundown apartment complex, where the hallways smelled like garbage and the elevator never worked. David is innocent, Maria told Sarah, tears in her eyes. He's the most honest person I know. He would never hurt anyone. Sarah had heard the same thing from hundreds of family members, but Maria seemed different. She was not making excuses or blaming others. She was just quietly certain that her husband had been framed. Do you have any proof that the evidence was planted? Sarah asked. No, Maria admitted. We couldn't afford a good lawyer or private investigators. We just had to trust the system, and the system failed us. Sarah began investigating Detective Sullivan's other cases. She filed Freedom of Information requests for arrest records and court documents. She interviewed defense lawyers who had faced Sullivan in court. What she found was disturbing. Marcus Sullivan had an unusually high conviction rate. His cases often involved perfect evidence that appeared suddenly during investigations. Witnesses in his cases often gave similar testimony, as if they had been coached. Most telling of all, several defense lawyers told Sarah they suspected Marcus of planting evidence, but they could never prove it. Sullivan always seems to find exactly the evidence he needs to make a case, one lawyer told Sarah. Fingerprints appear on objects where they shouldn't be. Witnesses suddenly remember details they didn't mention before. It's like he has magic powers. Sarah also discovered that many of Marcus's informants were the same people used in multiple cases. Carlos and Kevin, who had testified against David Chen, had also been witnesses in 4 other robbery cases handled by Marcus. The pattern was becoming clear. Marcus Sullivan was not a super cop. He was a corrupt detective who framed innocent people to maintain his reputation. Sarah began writing a series of articles about police corruption and wrongful convictions. She did not mention Marcus by name yet. She needed more evidence before making such serious accusations, but her investigation was attracting attention. Captain Rodriguez heard that a reporter was asking questions about his detective's cases. He warned Marcus to be careful. "There's a journalist sniffing around," Captain Rodriguez told Marcus. "Some woman named Sarah Rodriguez. She's been asking about your arrest records." The FBI raid on Tony Reyes's drug operation had produced more evidence than anyone expected. Hidden in Tony's safe, agents found detailed records of every payment he had made to corrupt police officers over the past 5 years. Agent Lisa Chen sat in her office, studying the handwritten ledger that would destroy Marcus Sullivan's life. Each entry showed a date, an amount, and the reason for the payment. March 15th, $10,000, Sullivan, warning about warehouse raid. April 3rd, $5,000, Sullivan, lost evidence in Johnson arrest. May 22nd, $8,000, Sullivan, false report on Garcia case, page after page of corruption. All in Tony's neat handwriting. Agent Williams looked over her shoulder. Sullivan's name appears 47 times in this book. We're talking about at least $500,000 in bribes over 5 years. It's enough to put him away for life, Agent Chen said. But I want to understand the full scope of what he's done. How many innocent people did he frame? How many guilty people did he let go? The federal investigation expanded quickly. Agent Chen obtained warrants to search Marcus's financial records. What she found confirmed everything Tony Reyes had told them. Marcus's bank accounts showed regular cash deposits that did not match his police salary. He had spent over $1 million on his house, cars, and his daughter's private school. On paper, he should not have been able to afford any of it. Agent Chen also discovered that Marcus had multiple safety deposit boxes at different banks. When the FBI opened them, they found stacks of cash totaling over $200,000. Meanwhile, Sarah Rodriguez was making her own discoveries. Her investigation into Marcus Sullivan's cases had revealed a pattern of suspicious evidence and coached witnesses. Sarah decided to focus on the David Chen case because it seemed the most obvious example of planted evidence. She interviewed everyone involved in the original investigation. Lisa, the coffee shop manager, had a different story when Sarah talked to her privately. "I never really saw the robbers clearly," Lisa admitted. "It was dark and I was scared. Detective Sullivan kept asking me questions about their height and build. He seemed to want me to say they were medium-sized men." "Did you feel pressured to identify David Chen?" "Not exactly pressured, but Detective Sullivan showed me Mr. Chen's photo before the lineup. He said, 'This is our suspect. Take a good look.' When I saw the lineup, I recognized the photo, not the actual robbery." Sarah found similar problems with the other witnesses. The 2 informants, Carlos and Kevin, were both afraid to talk to her. But Kevin finally agreed to meet her in a park away from the police station. "I lied," Kevin admitted, looking around nervously. "Detective Sullivan told me what to say. He said if I didn't testify against David Chen, he would make sure I got 10 years for my car theft charges." "So David Chen never asked you about jewelry store security?" "I never met David Chen before the trial. I'd never even heard his name until Sullivan told me to memorize it." Sarah felt sick to her stomach. An innocent man was in prison because of these lies. But the biggest breakthrough came when Sarah convinced a retired lab technician named Robert Hayes to talk to her. Hayes had processed the fingerprint evidence in David's case. "I always thought something was strange about those prints," Hayes told Sarah over coffee. "They were perfect impressions on broken glass, but there were no other prints anywhere else in the store." "What did you think that meant?" "Usually when someone touches glass during a robbery, they leave smudged or partial prints. These were like someone had carefully pressed their fingers onto the glass when it was clean and flat. Could the prints have been planted?" Hayes nodded slowly. "It's possible. If someone had David Chen's prints from somewhere else, like tools or a coffee cup, they could transfer them to the glass using special techniques." "Why didn't you say anything at the time?" "I was just a lab tech. Detective Sullivan had a great reputation. I figured I must be wrong. Sarah now had enough evidence to write her exposé, but she wanted to be absolutely certain. She hired a private investigator to dig deeper into Marcus Sullivan's background. The private investigator, a former police detective named Jim Parker, found records showing that Marcus had been investigated for corruption early in his career. The investigation had been dropped when the main witness died in a suspicious car accident. Sullivan has been dirty for a long time, Parker told Sarah. He's just been very good at covering his tracks. While Sarah prepared her article, the FBI investigation reached a critical point. Agent Chen had enough evidence to arrest Marcus Sullivan, but she wanted to coordinate with other investigations first. That's when Agent Chen learned about Sarah Rodriguez's work. A journalist has been investigating the same detective we're looking at, Agent Williams told her. She's focused on a wrongful conviction case. Agent Chen contacted Sarah and they agreed to share information. What Sarah had discovered about planted evidence combined perfectly with what the FBI had learned about Marcus's corruption network. He's been framing innocent people and taking money from criminals, Agent Chen told Sarah. Your David Chen case might be just the tip of the iceberg. Together, they identified at least 12 cases where Marcus had likely planted evidence or accepted bribes. Some involved innocent people going to prison. Others involved guilty criminals walking free because they paid Marcus to lose evidence. The most heartbreaking discovery was that David Chen was not Marcus's only innocent victim. 2 other men were serving long prison sentences for crimes Marcus had pinned on them when he needed quick arrests to maintain his reputation. Sarah's article was scheduled to run on Sunday, the day before the FBI planned to arrest Marcus. The headline read, "Decorated Detective's Web of Corruption: How Marcus Sullivan Framed the Innocent and Protected the Guilty." The article was devastating. Sarah detailed Marcus's corruption, the planted evidence, the paid informants, and the innocent people rotting in prison because of his lies. She focused heavily on David Chen's case, showing how every piece of evidence against him had been fabricated. She included interviews with the witnesses who admitted they had been coached or pressured. The article also revealed Marcus's lavish lifestyle and questioned how a police detective could afford a $500,000 house and expensive cars on his salary. When the newspaper hit the stand Sunday morning, it sent shockwaves through the city. Captain Rodriguez read it over breakfast and felt his world collapse. Marcus Sullivan was playing golf at his country club when his phone started ringing. Call after call from reporters wanting his comment on the article. Marcus read Sarah's article on his phone and felt his knees go weak. Everything was exposed. His corruption, his planted evidence, his bribes. 15 years of careful deception destroyed by one newspaper article. Marcus left the golf course and drove home in a panic. Jennifer was waiting for him with the newspaper in her hands. "Marcus, what is this?" she demanded. "Are these things true?" "It's all lies," Marcus said automatically. Some reporter trying to make a name for herself, but Jennifer was not stupid. She looked around their expensive house and thought about their lifestyle. She had never questioned where the money came from, but now the truth was obvious. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You really did these things, didn't you?" Ashley came downstairs holding her cell phone. "Dad, my friends are texting me about this article. They're saying you're a corrupt cop. Tell me it's not true." Marcus looked at his daughter's face and saw his future crumbling. Everything he had done to provide for his family was about to destroy them. Monday morning brought the FBI raid. 20 agents surrounded Marcus's house at 6 a.m., just as he was getting ready for work. Agent Chen knocked on the door with an arrest warrant in her hand. "Marcus Sullivan, you're under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, civil rights violations, and obstruction of justice," Agent Chen announced as she handcuffed him in front of his neighbors. The local news stations were there to film Marcus being led away in handcuffs. The man who had arrested so many others was now experiencing the humiliation of arrest himself. At the police station, Captain Rodriguez held an emergency meeting. Effective immediately, Detective Sullivan is suspended without pay pending investigation. We will be reviewing every case he has handled in the past 10 years. In his prison cell, David Chen was watching the news when Frank Williams called him over to the television. "Hey, David, you need to see this," Frank said excitedly. David watched in amazement as the news reported Marcus Sullivan's arrest for corruption. The reporter mentioned that several wrongful convictions would be reviewed, including the case of David Chen. For the first time in 4 years, David felt real hope. The truth was finally coming out. Maria was at work when her supervisor told her to check the news. She watched the report on her phone and started crying tears of joy and relief. "Emma," she whispered to herself, "Daddy might be coming home." That afternoon, David received a call from a lawyer with the Innocence Project, a group that helped wrongfully convicted people. "Mr. Chen, my name is attorney Jennifer Walsh. We've been following your case, and we believe we can get your conviction overturned within 6 months. Are you sure?" David asked, afraid to hope too much. The evidence against Detective Sullivan is overwhelming. Every case he handled is now suspect. The prosecutor's office has already agreed to review your conviction. The federal courthouse was packed with reporters and victims on the day of Marcus Sullivan's sentencing. News cameras lined the sidewalk outside as people waited to see justice finally served to the corrupt detective who had destroyed so many lives. Marcus sat at the defendant's table wearing an Orange County jail jumpsuit. His expensive suits were gone, along with everything else he had bought with dirty money. His face looked thin and pale after 6 months in jail awaiting trial. Judge William Morrison looked down at Marcus with disgust. Judge Morrison had been on the federal bench for 20 years and had seen many corrupt officials. But Marcus's case was one of the worst. "Mr. Sullivan," Judge Morrison began, "you have pleaded guilty to 17 counts of corruption, including bribery, civil rights violations, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Your crimes represent a complete betrayal of your oath as a police officer." Marcus stared at the table, unable to look at the judge or the crowd of people he had hurt. The prosecution had recommended a 25-year sentence, but victims were allowed to speak before the judge made his decision. David Chen was the first to speak. He had been released from prison 2 months earlier when his conviction was officially overturned. Standing at the podium, David looked directly at Marcus for the first time since the trial that had destroyed his life. "Marcus Sullivan stole 4 years of my life," David said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "He stole the first 4 years of my daughter's life. He put my family through hell because he needed someone to blame for a crime, and I was convenient." David's voice grew stronger as he continued. "But worse than what he did to me is what he represents. He was supposed to protect people and uphold justice. Instead, he planted evidence, took bribes, and sent innocent people to prison. He betrayed everything that police work is supposed to stand for." Maria Chen spoke next, holding 4-year-old Emma's hand. "My daughter grew up thinking Daddy lived at work because I couldn't explain prison to a 3-year-old. She missed her father's bedtime stories, his help with her first steps, her first words. That time can never be given back." Other victims followed. Robert Martinez, a young father who had served 3 years for a drug charge that Marcus had fabricated. Patricia Williams, whose son had been beaten by criminals that Marcus protected in exchange for money. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Ashley Sullivan, now 18 years old, walked to the podium. She had changed her last name to her mother's maiden name and was preparing to start college in the fall. Marcus looked up when he heard his daughter's footsteps. This was the first time he had seen her since his arrest 8 months earlier. "Your Honor," Ashley began, her voice shaking slightly. "Marcus Sullivan was my father. I loved him and looked up to him my whole life. I thought he was a hero who caught bad guys and made the world safer." She turned to look at Marcus, tears in her eyes. "I found out that everything I believed about him was a lie. The house I grew up in, the school I attended, the car I learned to drive in, all of it was paid for by destroying innocent people's lives." Ashley wiped her eyes and continued, "I'm ashamed to have his blood in my veins. I'm ashamed that I benefited from his crimes. I'm sorry to everyone he hurt, and I hope you can forgive me for not knowing what kind of man he really was." Marcus felt tears running down his face as he listened to his daughter disown him publicly. This was worse than any prison sentence. Ashley looked at him one last time. "You were supposed to teach me right from wrong. Instead, you taught me that some people are willing to destroy others for money. You're not my father anymore. You're just a criminal who used to live in my house." She walked back to her seat without looking at Marcus again. Judge Morrison had heard enough. "Mr. Sullivan, your crimes went far beyond simple corruption. You perverted the entire justice system for your personal gain. You sent innocent people to prison and allowed dangerous criminals to walk free. The judge paused and looked directly at Marcus. You took an oath to serve and protect, but you served only yourself and protected only your bank account. You have shown no remorse for your victims and no understanding of the damage you've caused. I sentence you to 30 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. You will also forfeit all assets obtained through your criminal activity and pay restitution to your victims. Marcus felt his legs give out as the sentence hit him. 30 years. He was 45 years old. He would be 75 when he got out if he lived that long. The judge continued. You will serve your sentence at ADX Florence, a maximum security federal prison. You will have minimal contact with other prisoners and no special treatment because of your former position as a police officer. ADX Florence was known as the hardest prison in America. It housed terrorists, spies, and the worst criminals in the federal system. Marcus would spend 23 hours a day alone in a small concrete cell. As the marshals led Marcus away in shackles, he passed the row where his victims sat. David Chen looked him in the eye as he walked by. I forgive you, David said quietly, but I'll never forget what you did. Marcus was taken to a holding cell to wait for transport to Colorado. The county jail where he had spent the last 6 months was luxury compared to where he was going. His cellmate was a drug dealer named Rico, who had been arrested in the same federal sweep that caught Marcus. Rico recognized Marcus from their past business dealings. Well, Rico said with a cruel smile. If it isn't Detective Sullivan. Funny how we're both wearing orange now. Marcus said nothing. He lay on his narrow bunk and stared at the ceiling, thinking about how completely his life had collapsed. Outside the courthouse, David Chen spoke to reporters about his feelings after watching his tormentor sentenced. I'm glad justice was served, David said, but no sentence can give me back the 4 years I lost or repair the damage done to my family. Marcus Sullivan destroyed lives for money, and now he'll pay the price. Sarah Rodriguez, the journalist whose investigation had exposed Marcus, was also interviewed. This case shows why we need a free press to hold powerful people accountable, Sarah said. Marcus Sullivan thought he was untouchable, but the truth always comes out eventually. David's conviction had been officially overturned, and he was declared innocent of all charges. The city agreed to pay him $2.5 million in compensation for his wrongful imprisonment, though David said no amount of money could truly make up for what he had lost. With the settlement money, David and Maria bought a modest house in a safe neighborhood where Emma could grow up. David returned to teaching, this time at a program that helped formerly incarcerated people reintegrate into society. I understand what they're going through, David told his new students. I know what it's like to be judged by society and to feel like the system is against you. But there's always hope for a second chance. Maria returned to nursing, working at a hospital that served low-income families. She had learned during David's imprisonment that she was stronger than she ever knew possible. Emma was now in kindergarten and loved having her daddy home every day. She didn't remember much about the years when David was in prison, but she understood that her family had been through something difficult and come out stronger. Marcus's journey to ADX Florence took 2 days in a prison transport van. Chained to other federal prisoners, he rode across the country toward his new home. The prison was located in the mountains of Colorado, surrounded by high walls and guard towers. It looked like a fortress designed to keep the world's worst criminals locked away forever. During processing, Marcus was strip-searched, fingerprinted, and photographed. The guards treated him with professional indifference. His former status as a police officer meant nothing here. Welcome to ADX Florence, the guard said as he led Marcus to his cell. You'll be in administrative segregation, which means 23 hours a day in your cell. 1 hour for exercise in a concrete cage. No television, no radio, no contact with other prisoners. Marcus's cell was 7 feet by 12 feet. It contained a concrete bed with a thin mattress, a small sink and toilet, and a narrow window that showed only a slice of sky. This would be his world for the next 30 years. The first night was the hardest. Marcus lay on his narrow bed listening to the sounds of the prison, distant voices, metal doors clanging, footsteps in the corridor. He thought about his old life and everything he had lost. His big house was now owned by a family who had no idea of its history. His cars had been sold at auction. His bank accounts were empty, the money distributed to his victims. Jennifer had remarried and moved to another state with Ashley. They had both changed their names and tried to forget that Marcus Sullivan had ever existed. Ashley was doing well in college, studying social work, because she wanted to help people who had been hurt by the system. She never mentioned having a father, and her friends assumed he was dead. Captain Rodriguez had retired early, his reputation damaged by having trusted Marcus for so many years. The police department had been reformed from top to bottom, with new procedures to prevent corruption. The other corrupt officers in Marcus's network had also been arrested and sentenced. Some cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for lighter sentences, providing more evidence of Marcus's crimes. As the months passed, 5 years had passed since Marcus Sullivan was sentenced to federal prison. The corrupt detective's name had become a cautionary tale told in police academies across the country. His crimes had changed laws and procedures, making it harder for future officers to plant evidence or take bribes. David Chen stood at the podium in the Metro Community College auditorium, looking out at 50 formerly incarcerated students who had gathered for their graduation ceremony. These men and women had completed a program David had created to help people rebuild their lives after prison. "When I was wrongfully convicted and sent to prison," David told the graduates, "I thought my life was over. I thought I would never be able to contribute to society again. But I learned that our past mistakes, or in my case, someone else's lies about us, don't have to define our future." The audience included family members, social workers, and employers who had agreed to give these graduates a second chance. Maria sat in the front row, holding hands with 10-year-old Emma, who was now in 5th grade and helped her father with his work when she could. "Each of you has overcome obstacles that most people can't imagine," David continued. "You've learned new skills, changed your thinking, and committed to making positive contributions to your communities. You should be proud of how far you've come." After the ceremony, David was approached by Dr. Janet Foster, who had become the permanent head of the community college's continuing education department. "David, the state education department wants to expand your program to 10 other colleges," Dr. Foster told him. "They're offering a $2 million grant to make it happen." David smiled. "That's wonderful news. We can help a lot more people." The success of David's program had attracted national attention. He had been invited to speak at conferences across the country about criminal justice reform and wrongful convictions. But David was most proud of the individual success stories. Marcus Williams, no relation to Frank Williams, had been one of David's first students. Marcus had served 8 years for burglary and came to David's program angry at the world. Now he worked as a counselor helping other former prisoners and had been clean from drugs for 3 years. "Professor Chen saved my life," Marcus Williams often told people. "He showed me that I could be more than my worst mistake." Linda Rodriguez had been in and out of prison for drug offenses before joining David's program. She was now a certified addiction counselor and had opened her own treatment center in the community where she grew up. "David taught me that my experience in prison could be used to help others," Linda said. "Instead of being ashamed of my past, I use it to connect with people who are struggling." David's work had also led to broader criminal justice reforms. The state had created an Innocence Commission to review questionable convictions. New laws required better training for police officers and stronger oversight of evidence handling. Sarah Rodriguez, the journalist who had exposed Marcus Sullivan's corruption, now worked for a national magazine and continued investigating wrongful convictions. She had written a book about David's case called The Frame-Up that became a bestseller. "David Chen's story shows both the worst and best of our justice system," Sarah wrote in her book. "It shows how corruption can destroy innocent lives, but also how truth and perseverance can ultimately prevail." The book had been made into a documentary that won an Emmy Award. Part of the proceeds were donated to organizations that help wrongfully convicted people. Maria had also found her calling in the aftermath of their ordeal. She now worked as a victim's advocate, helping families navigate the criminal justice system when their loved ones were arrested. "I know what it's like to feel powerless when someone you love is caught up in the system," Maria told the families she counseled. "I can help you understand what's happening and what resources are available." Emma had grown into a thoughtful and compassionate child who wanted to become a lawyer when she grew up. She often told people that her daddy helped people who had been treated unfairly, and she wanted to do the same thing. "My daddy was innocent, but some people didn't believe him," Emma would explain to her friends. Now he helps other people prove they're good too. The Chen family had moved to a comfortable middle-class neighborhood with the settlement money from David's wrongful conviction. But they lived modestly, donating much of the money to organizations that helped other victims of wrongful conviction. Money can't give us back those lost years, David often said, but it can help prevent other families from going through what we did. Meanwhile, Marcus Sullivan was completing his 5th year at ADX Florence. The isolation and confinement had aged him rapidly. His hair was gray, his face was lined with wrinkles, and his body had grown thin from the prison diet and lack of exercise. Marcus spent most of his time reading and writing. He had written hundreds of pages about his crimes, trying to understand how he had become so corrupt. He had also written letters to his victims, though most were never sent. In his cell, Marcus had a small collection of newspaper clippings about David Chen's work with formerly incarcerated people. A guard who knew about Marcus's case had saved the articles and given them to him. Reading about David's success was both painful and inspiring for Marcus. He was proud that something positive had come from the terrible thing he had done, but he was also reminded daily of the innocent man he had destroyed. Marcus had tried to contact Ashley several times over the years, but she had never responded to his letters. He had heard through his lawyer that she had graduated college with honors and was working as a social worker in California. Jennifer had remarried and was living a quiet life with her new husband. She had legally changed her name and tried to forget that Marcus Sullivan had ever existed. Marcus understood that his family had moved on without him. He had destroyed their lives along with his victims' lives. The isolation was his punishment, and he accepted it. In his journal, Marcus wrote, "I thought I was smart enough to get away with my crimes forever. I thought I deserved the money and lifestyle I stole from others. I was wrong about everything. David Chen is a better man in prison than I ever was as a free person." The federal investigation into police corruption had continued long after Marcus's conviction. Dozens of other officers in multiple cities had been arrested for similar crimes. The FBI had created a special task force dedicated to investigating law enforcement corruption. Agent Lisa Chen, who had led the investigation into Marcus, was promoted to head the task force. She often used Marcus's case as an example of how corruption could spread if not caught early. Marcus Sullivan's crimes didn't happen overnight, Agent Chen would tell police chiefs during training sessions. He started small and got bolder over time. We need systems in place to catch corruption before it reaches this level. The police department in Metro City had been completely reformed. New leadership, new procedures, and constant oversight had restored some public trust. Captain Rodriguez had been replaced by Captain Maria Santos, who had a reputation for integrity and reform. "We're still paying for Marcus Sullivan's crimes," Captain Santos admitted during a community meeting, "but we've learned from them. We've put systems in place to make sure nothing like this happens again." The jewelry store owner, Mr. Goldberg, had recovered from his injuries and reopened his store. He was now 78 years old and thinking about retirement. "I'm glad the truth came out about that young man," Mr. Goldberg told a reporter. "No one should go to prison for something they didn't do. I'm sorry I couldn't help him more during his trial." David had visited Mr. Goldberg after his release from prison. The old man had apologized for not speaking up more forcefully about the inconsistencies in the case. "You were hurt and confused," David had told him. "You trusted the police to catch the right person. We all did." As David's program expanded to other colleges, he was often asked to speak at conferences about criminal justice reform. His message was always the same. The system had failed him, but people of goodwill could work together to make it better. "I don't want revenge against Marcus Sullivan," David would tell audiences. "I want reform that prevents other Marcus Sullivans from destroying innocent lives." David had also testified before the state legislature about the need for better compensation for wrongfully convicted people. His advocacy had led to new laws that provided more support for exonerees. "Money can't fix everything," David testified, "but it can help people rebuild their lives after years of imprisonment for crimes they didn't commit." On the 10th anniversary of David's arrest, Sarah Rodriguez wrote a follow-up article about how the case had changed everyone involved. "Marcus Sullivan is serving his time in one of America's toughest prisons," Sarah wrote. "He has 25 years left on his sentence and will likely die behind bars. His crimes cost taxpayers millions of dollars and destroyed dozens of lives. David Chen, meanwhile, has built a new life dedicated to helping others. His wrongful conviction became the foundation for a career helping other victims of the justice system. He turned the worst thing that ever happened to him into a force for positive change. The article noted that David's program had helped over 300 formerly incarcerated people find jobs, housing, and education,